Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We are discussing a brand new product tonight, DAC Pre-Buff. I know we talked about it a little bit at DAC Days for those of you that were there, and we now have a product to launch. We've been going through rigorous testing and trials with this product in the manufacturing facility to make sure that it was up to our standards, and we now have a product that we that meets our requirements and our needs. So without further ado, we will get started. So first of all, let's talk about acidity. Oftentimes we just gloss over it, and well, we're talking about the acidity of the horse's stomach, or we're talking about the acidity that we're trying to buffer. But I think it's very important to discuss what we're actually talking about. So for example, some acidity levels of some common substances. Coffee. Most of it, I don't, but a lot of people drink coffee, and it's got about a pH of about 5. And if that sounds like gobbledygook to you and you're like, I don't know what that means, don't worry, we will discuss exactly what it means. I think it's really important before we try to fix a problem that we understand what is causing the problem and the kind of nuances around that. So vinegar we know is very will sting if you get it in a cut, and it's got a pH of 3 when we talk about this term acidity. But what about tomatoes or soda or beer or lemon juice or stomach acid? So let's discuss what is an acid and what is this term pH that people talk about. So I know this gets a little scientific, but again, I've got the text on the slide so that you can utilize this with your trainings when you're explaining to people why we have created this product, why it was an important product to create. So an acid is a substance which, when you dissolve it in water, it releases protons or hydrogen ions. So it forms these hydrogen ions in solution, and it is a donor. It gives those away. It releases those hydrogen ions, which we can use the term proton synonymously. Now, in our graphic on the right-hand side here, we've got different acids. Hydrochloric acid. It's down here with an acidity. It's really strong acid. And then as we move up, lemons and vinegar and tomato and apples, all weaker acids, but all considered acids, with water being neutral in the middle. So then if we go to the other side, what is opposite a base? What is, what is left and right? We talk about acid and bases. Now, bases is any compound which, combined with water in solution, it will accept those protons or those hydrogen ions. So if we go past water, what are we looking at? Baking soda, soap, milk, ammonia, drain cleaner are all what we call basic. So you've got acid on one side and basic. Some of the kind of physical properties, anything that's basic is slimy. It's more slimy in your fingers, like soap is slimy. A drain cleaner, if heaven forbid you ever got it on your fingers, is actually quite slimy, versus acids, if they hit your fingers, they are almost abrasive. When we talk about pH, that is a measure, that is the unit of measure for acidity. Just like we measure body weight in kilograms or pounds here in America, you measure acidity via pH. So if you hear a pH of 5 or 6 or 7, you know that it's the measure of the acidity or the basic, the alkali or basic of an actual liquid. It's a measure from 0 to 14. And you'll often see these colors when we look at these acid to base charts. acid is red, and then we go to the opposite end of the spectrum is typically always pinky going and blue going into pink with green right there in the middle. Low pH values correspond with high concentrations of those hydrogen or protons, and high pH values 7, as we mentioned, is neutral, and that's water. If you look right around, we've got, urine, if you're drinking plenty of water, and seawater are right around that neutral level. But water that we're drinking, normal distilled water, is a pH of 7. That is right there in the middle. We're not acid and we're not basic. It's what we consider neutral. And if we talk about buffers, oftentimes we're talking about buffering the stomach acid. Well, what on earth are we talking about? When we've discussed other products, we've talked about the ability of certain ingredients to buffer stomach acid. And first of all, I think it's important to discuss what is a buffer. A buffer is a solution which resists the changes in pH when a small amount of acid or base is added. So let's say we have something that is a really strong base, or it's alkali, and we want to get back closer to the middle. You're going to add a little bit of acid to bring it back to neutral. Or if we have something that's a real strong acid and we want to neutralize that a little and buffer it and bring it back closer to the middle, we're going to add a basic substance. It also holds a very narrow, a buffer, a good true buffer will hold the pH within a very narrow range. And that's ideally what we want to do with our horses. We chose buffers, and their unit of measure is this term pK, and you don't need to remember that, but we've chosen buffers that mimic the pH, our desired pH in the horse's stomach. So what buffer is going to get us from that acidic solution that we have created in the horse's stomach and buffer that to a more healthy situation that is not going to cause the damage that we know it can. So we know acid is on one end, basic is on the other end, and we use buffers to move those, to make a solution a little less alkali or make it a little less acidic, or just move that scale wherever we want it. We use buffers, all different kinds of buffers, to do that. So let's get on to the actual horse. And the target organ with this product is the stomach. And if we just go back and do a little bit of basic equine digestive physiology, and we look at the stomach again, we see that there's two distinct regions of the stomach. We've got this non-protected region at the top, which is this light pink tissue, and down the bottom we've got this dark pink tissue, which we consider protected, and it's protected by this mucus coating. Now, there are little cells down in the bottom part of this tissue that secrete acid continually. So when we're meal feeding horses, or we're putting them in stressful environments, or giving them too much grain, then that acid will build up, and it actually splashes up onto this non-protected region, and you can see here from our bottom picture, causes gastric ulcers. Now, those gastric ulcers don't happen overnight. It happens after a prolonged period of strong acid. So our goal is to intervene in this process and mitigate some of that strong acid that we're creating, buffer that before it can cause these damaging effects to this gastric tissue. Well, if we also think about, so gastric acid in the horse's stomach has a pH between 1 and 2. So we'll look at that slide chart again, but if you remember, hydrochloric acid was a 0, and then Stomach acid sits right at that between a 1 and a 2. Lemon juice is right around a 2, and then we started to move up as things got weaker and weaker. But that really strong acid sits right down there in the bottom. And then as we've mixed in some more food particles, we have what we call this medium density area where the pH is about a 4 to 5. And then in the top, we've got a lot, we should have more saliva and food matter sitting there creating a mat, decreasing or neutralizing that stomach acid. So as we move up in the stomach, the acidity gets less and less. We get more close to the middle, more close to neutral. But what happens when you exercise the horse and the abdominal muscles press on the horse's actual stomach? And there's been research to show that this top line here is the gastric pressure, the pressure on the stomach when the horse is exercising. So at rest, there's very little pressure, but as we start to walk, trot, canter, and do hill work, you can see that the pressure on the horse's stomach significantly increases, and what it does is squeeze that stomach so this high density very strong acid down here with a pH of 1 to 2 gets pushed up into that non-protected region and causes our gastric ulcers. So what we want to be able to do is buffer that stomach acid at particular times. Now, I don't want to buffer that stomach acid 100% of the time because it is there to break down food. The stomach acid is meant to be between a 1 and a 2. But if we think about a horse in the wild, they're continually chewing, they're continually producing saliva, and they're continually putting food in their stomach to buffer that stomach acid. But the acid is there in order to break down the food. So we don't want to constantly buffer it, otherwise we'll get non-digested food particles passing through into the small intestine of the horse. But there are times when we know that our horse is not going to be eating, and we know that that acid can actually get stronger and stronger. And so just by looking at this chart here, I would want to feed my horse something immediately prior to exercise that might buffer that acid so that when I'm cantering, doing hill work, reining, barrel racing, whatever my exercise choice is, that I'm not getting this splash effect. So this is an instantaneous or semi-instantaneous mode of action that we're looking for. We're looking to feed something within 30 minutes to an hour prior to exercise and get results. So what is causing this decrease in acidity? So what is causing the strong acidity in the horse's gut? Well, we're fasting them. We're meal feeding them high grain diets. I go to stalls all the time where I ask the owners if they're feeding enough hay, and I look in the stalls and this is what I see, and they say, yeah, our horses get plenty of hay. Well, if the horse has nothing to chew on, for more than about 2 hours, then we're going to see some significant changes in the acidity in its gut. These low roughage diets, and then these stresses that we put on our horses, transporting them, stabling them, the intense exercise. How about weaning? Weaning is stressful on mares and foals. Some horses really get stressed by interactions with people they don't know. The veterinarian, for example, they know every time we see the vet, something's going to happen to me. I'm going to get dewormed, I'm going to get shots, or something may happen to me, and so they have some anxiety. Some horses, it's just the act of deworming can stress them out. Changes in season. We know as of late, anyone out here on the East Coast knows, we've been chopping and changing in our temperatures. We've gone from 80 to 50. I was in New England last week, and on Wednesday it was 96 degrees, and on Thursday it was 41. And with weather changes like that, that can also cause stress, which indirectly also causes an increase in acidity in the horse's gut. So these are all things that we can preempt. We know most of the time when they're going to happen, and so we could utilize a product prior to that stressful event in order to buffer that stomach acid just to get them through that particular event. Now, this is not like any of our products. It's not going to overcome poor management. We still need to look at our whole management protocol and not just rely on one product. But this is one part of the puzzle, is short-term, or this product actually works quite long-term, but short-acting, fast-acting buffering capacity. So I want to just show you a slide that I've shown most of you before. This was a study looking over a 24-hour period, looking at the stomach acid in horses when they were fed free choice hay. And you can see here a pH of 4. Now, that's where we want to keep the acidity. We know that if we take that acid out of the horse's stomach and we measure it, just the plain old acid, it's about between a 1 and a 2. But that's not normal for the horse. What is normal for the horse is to have saliva buffering it and to have food particles in there diluting that acid. So really we want the stomach environment to sit at around a pH of 4. And you can see over a 24-hour period when these horses had access, full-on access to grass hay, the acid measurements, the pH measurements were right always above a 4. A few times it dropped below, but for the majority of the time we were up here right close to neutral. But what happens if we take all the hay away and the grain and we just let them drink water, because we don't want to withhold water? You can see these spikes here, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these spikes above a pH of 4, that is when they were drinking water. But other than that, the pH was low, very low, and it took only 1 hour of feed deprivation, 1 hour. And I'm sure all of us can count many times where our horses have not had something to eat for just 1 hour. Within just 1 hour of feed deprivation, we can see that the acid was undiluted, unbuffered by saliva, and it was back down between a 1 and a 2. By 18 hours, these horses had bleeding lesions. What is, I think, more critical to look at is that just 6 hours or less of feed deprivation. So if you've got a window of 6 hours or more, we saw increased inflammation in the gut lining. And what's not uncommon, especially as we go into our winter months when the day gets shorter and it's colder out, we'll feed our horses at 5 p.m. They're usually done everything within 30 minutes, but let's just conservatively say they're done by 7. It can be as quick as 30 minutes for everything to be through the stomach, and we're not coming back until 7 a.m. again to feed our horses. That's a window of 12 hours where there's nothing sitting in the stomach. Now, I'm not talking about feed deprivation as in the whole gut, because there will be hay sitting in the horse's hindgut for up to 48 hours. I'm talking about the stomach, though. I'm talking about the horses chewing, about developing saliva. If we have this greater than 6-hour window, we really are causing some issues, and 12 hours is not uncommon for a lot of our horses. We've seen this before. We know that close to 90% of horses have gastric ulcers and about 60% have the colonic ulcers, and over half the population have them in both regions. So let's start looking at the ingredients we've included in this product to make it a buffer. So the first ingredient, calcium. We know there are lots of different forms of calcium, and we know that calcium has good buffering capacity. We've seen studies in horses just feeding alfalfa and how alfalfa alone helped buffer the stomach acid in horses. We know that there is calcium carbonate, we typically call that limestone, but as recently we have been using a natural marine sourced type of calcium. It's mined from fossilized red algae. It's rich in minerals, and this product has got really strong buffering properties. Now, we talked about buffering and what buffering was. So it's going to take that really strong acid and it's going to neutralize it and it's going to hold it. So we don't want to just take it all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum. We want to take it to above a 4 and we want to hold it there because that is our safe window. So we want it to act on the pH, but we also want it to stabilize. So we use this form of calcium called calcite. Now, calcite is the American Association of Feed Control Officers approved term for this ingredient. You may see it written on other competitors' products as marine-derived algae or marine-derived calcium. They are inaccurate terms. The correct term is calcite. The brand name of the product we use is Calcite powder, and you can see here it's under electron microscope. It's really porous. It's got a lot of holes in it because it is a honeycomb structure, and we'll look a little closer under the microscope and see that. But our typical limestone or calcium carbonate is more solid, so it doesn't have as much surface area to buffer the stomach acid. But the calcite or the calcite that we're using is very porous, so it's very highly available and very efficient. Here you can see that honeycomb structure of the calcite that we're using. And I think this is a great representation, and you can disregard 1 kilogram, that's 2.2 pounds. Let's start at the bottom. These are all ingredients that are really good at buffering, or so we thought. So sodium bicarbonate, it's on the alkaline side, it's a base, and it's, if we think about the whole soccer field here, if we break it up into sections so that we can visualize the strength of sodium bicarbonate as a buffer, it'll cover the goal. Calcium carbonate, which is limestone, which is most typically used in buffering products, well, it'll cover this circle in the middle here where everybody starts. And we're talking about surface area. The surface area of these products cover this region. But because the calcite or the calcite has such honeycomb structure, it has so much more surface area. The surface area of the calcite covers the entire soccer field. So that's just a visual so that you can see how much more productive calcite is than calcium carbonate or products that include sodium bicarbonate as other types of buffers. So there are a lot of studies looking at this type of marine-derived calcium from red fossilized algae. I found several studies in humans. This is a good one done in horses. You know, I like to the foundation to all of our products has to be science and research, and I really like to have equine research where possible. And so this study in New Zealand looked at the influence of feeding these high calcium algae supplement on gastric ulcers in horses. And what they found, they had 10 horses ranging in age from 2 to 11, ranging males and females. And we score ulcers from 0 to 4. And on day 0 of the trial, they did a scope, put the camera down their throat, and looked at the horse's ulcer score, and they ranged from a 1 to a 3. After 30 days of treatment with this product, every single one of the horses had seen a significant reduction in ulcer score. Close to 3/4 of those horses, 70% of those horses, had an ulcer score of 0 after 30 days. Now, a lot of these horses, they didn't have very significant ulcers to start with. So just using a buffering product to buffer that strong acid enabled those horses enough time to heal their own ulcers and for them not to progress because we're buffering that acid. So what else are we putting in this product? We're also putting magnesium. Magnesium is an excellent buffer. It's neutralizing that excess acid in the animal's digestive system. As I mentioned, a buffer will maintain that acidity within a narrow range. Magnesium oxide in particular has really good bioavailability in horses. It's the most concentrated magnesium source, meaning that you can feed less magnesium oxide than with other forms. Now, if we go back and we look at our pH scale and we look down here at hydrochloric acid and we look between a 1 and a 2, we've got our stomach acid, and lemon juice is a 2 and vinegar is slightly above that between a 2 and a 3. Apples sit above a 3, tomatoes right around a 4, bananas just right there at a 5. Water, blood, we consider that fairly neutral. Baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, sits here just above an 8. Calcite sits right here at 11, and magnesium oxide sits here at a 12 on that alkaline side. But it's not just that these two products are alkaline, it's that they have the ability when combined together to bring that acid right back down here to a 4 and hold it. We're not going all the way to a 1. We're not going to a 7. We're not going to a 10. We're coming back down here between a 4 and a 5, and we're going to hold it. That's what a good buffer does. It neutralizes to the point you want that we have determined it to go to, and it holds it. We've also included threonine. Now, threonine is an essential amino acid in horses. The intestine of all animals utilizes threonine more than any other essential amino acid, and the gut retains as much as 60% of dietary threonine for the synthesis of these things called mucins. What do you think mucin sounds like? Mucus. Mucins form a mucus layer coating the gut lining, forming that physical barrier to protect against irritants such as acid. So we put threonine into this product to also help the mucus layer of the gut. Now, just like any other product, we've got papaya and aloe, and there are a bunch of other ingredients that we could use to put in to form that sticky coating. The papaya and the aloe get washed away as fast as the horse consumes it. What we're doing by adding threonine is we're enhancing the body's ability to create that mucus layer. So we're increasing the internal threonine amount in the tissue and in the lining of the gut, so the horse's gut lining is producing those mucins and can continue to produce those mucins even if the acid starts washing it away. So that's why adding threonine is much more proactive than adding something like aloe or papaya. Because once it's been washed away, it's not getting replenished until you feed it to the horse again. So I mentioned we score ulcers in horses, but really what I want to show you here is this is normal gut lining here. And then we've got inflammation and then erosion and then ulceration. So inflammation, we want to, right here, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but right on this arrow between normal and inflammation, that's where we want to stop. We don't want inflammation to develop. So we want to hold that acidity right there so that we don't cause inflammation, we don't cause erosion, and we don't cause ulceration. Because once we get into the inflamed tissue and erosion, we need cool gut. What we want to do with this product is prevent, can't really say prevent, this is not a drug, but we want to get ahead of the issues causing that inflammation in the horse. So we want to buffer that stomach acid. So that's what we created. We created this product. We called it pre-buff because it's really was, the idea was we want a pre-workout buffer. But then we think about stress and we think about weaning and training and trailering and deworming and vet visits and high performance and any other stressor or anxiety in your horse. We want to feed it before that event. We want it to act fast. We want it to last. We don't want it to just wash away with the next cycle of acid. We want it to last a few hours. It had to be safe. Obviously, everything that DAC produces, sells, it must be safe. And we did not want it to test. No, so we want this to be able to be fed to performance horses and not just used in a sick situation where these horses can be on drugs that are, banned substances, but these horses aren't competing. We wanted a natural, safe product that wasn't going to test, was going to be completely safe to feed to our performance horses. We included the bioavailable calcium, the calcite, the magnesium, and the threonine. This is the data sheet that we created. Again, like all of our products, it's veterinarian recommended. It's got the NASK seal. This is how you're going to see it in the catalog. This is what the label looks like. Like all of our other guaranteed analysis, you can see the percentage and then the actual amount right beside it. It's a feeding rate for a mature horse of 60 cc's. A syringe or a tube to administer the product will come with it. Young horses, it's 20 cc's, yearlings, 40 cc's, and the mature horses, it's 60 cc's. Now, if you want to be 100% sure that all the product goes in the horse's mouth, then you can use that tube to suck it up out of the bottle. It comes in a gallon jug. It's a liquid to put that in the horse's mouth. But if your horse is anxious and we're creating more issues by having to put it in their mouth, then you can also mix it in with the feed. But just make sure that they're consuming it all. It's got some glycerin in there, so it is quite palatable. I have tasted it, and it is got quite a sweet taste, and so it's very palatable. It's got a consistency of kind of a thinner yogurt, so that it won't fall out of the tube that we're using to suck it up. But it's not too thick. It's not a true paste. So when to use it compared to cool gut? Because I know that's the question. I've already had that question from some of the reps. When are we going to use pre-buff and when are we going to use cool gut? Kind of like when we talked about the new joint supplement. When were we going to use LQHA? When we're going to use OptiFlex? Pre-buff, pre-workout, pre-trailering, pre-stressful event. It will buffer the stomach acid with magnesium and calcite. It will increase the mucus in the stomach with a threonine. It will not aid tissue health directly. Indirectly, because we're able to buffer that acid. So if we don't have too much tissue damage, then the horse will be able to heal itself. We want to get ahead of the curve. We want our young horses that we're putting into work, or we're starting to do work, or the horse that otherwise doesn't have a lot of stress and is trailering. We just want to make sure that these stressful events that we're putting them under, they can have an added level of support. When do we use cool gut? When we have stomach and hindgut distress that's definitely been determined either by the veterinarian, or we've got girthiness and weight loss and kicking at the sides. We know that there is more of a hindgut and stomach issue. We are going to buffer stomach and hindgut with the calcite and the yeast. Now the yeast is in the cool gut, and that's going to work in the hindgut to buffer buffer the hindgut acid. And the cool gut is more for these chronic issues. I know you all love a good comparison, so I made sure that I did not release this, and I wanted those of you that took the time to get on this webinar and be educated to be the first to get this comparison list. So if we go down, I've chosen, I think that these three products are probably the most similar as far as the marketing strategies, as far as where these products are aligned in the market and what these companies promote them, which line they sit in. So the gut health product, the nutrient buffer, and Purina Outlast are all buffering products that sit in that lane of buffering that don't necessarily have the tissue boosting benefits. So where does the DAC pre-buff sit in relation to these others? Well, if we look at magnesium oxide, which was the first ingredient on the guaranteed analysis based on order of inclusion, being a significant buffer. We have magnesium oxide in the pre-buff. It is not in the gut health product. Anyone who's seen that, it's a blue-like product. And Magox is in the nutrient buffer, and it is in the Outlast. Calcium carbonate, we do not use in the pre-buff. Competitors do. We do not use alfalfa as a source of calcium in this product. We wanted to use 100% calcite because it's just significantly more effective, and we're really trying to make this a really concentrated product. So we use 100% calcite in this product for the calcium source that's going to do the buffering. We do not have zinc oxide in this product. Threonine, as we mentioned, is an amino acid. This should actually say glycerin for palatability. Sodium bicarbonate. No, we chose not to use sodium bicarbonate. That is another buffer, but I will discuss that later. As you saw on my chart of the football field, the calcite is just significantly more available for buffering capacity compared to sodium bicarbonate. So that was the first reason, but there are some other reasons we will discuss. The actual calcium percentage amount per serving, and as I mentioned, all of the calcium in DAC pre-buff comes from calcite, and so we've got about 2.4 grams, and it's 100% coming from calcite. You could see more calcium in competitors' products, but it's not all coming from calcite. There are other sources of calcium. Magnesium, you can see our percentage there. These three liquid products, the pre-buff, gut health, and nutrient buffer, they're all a 60 ml or 60 cc feeding rate because they're a liquid product versus the 200 grams for the other product. NASK certification, this is huge. We will discuss NASK on the next slide. DAC is the only one of these that has NASK certification, and the first three products are liquid. So sodium bicarb, it does buffer stomach acid, but it breaks down quickly and it is absorbed into plasma, into the horse's blood. Once the sodium bicarbonate breaks down, the stomach acid builds back up. The rapid breakdown of the sodium bicarb makes it an ineffective buffer to guard the horse's stomach against disturbance. There is also a maximum threshold for sodium bicarbonate in plasma, all right, as set by several regulatory bodies and authorities. Over this level, that can lead to a positive test. So in a lot of the racing communities and racing authorities, if you've got a blood plasma sodium bicarb level, it's actually carbon dioxide level, carbon level, then that can result in a positive test. And we just don't want to risk that. We wanted a product that was 100% safe to feed to performance horses. Well, let's finish on NASK because this is absolutely important. The NASK quality seal identifies products from companies that are committed to quality, vigilance, and continuous improvement to promote the well-being of companion animals and horses. That is their motto. The quality seal program is the central part of the NASK program. So if you see a product that has that yellow seal, it means they have to have a quality control manual in place, standard operating procedures, adverse event reporting complaint system in place, stringent labeling guidelines for all products and all forms of labeling, warnings where necessary, and also the big one, random product testing by independent labs to ensure ingredients meet label claims. So what does NASK mean? It means 100% quality control. It means an added level of security for you that what you're feeding is actually what is written on the label. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.